there. For those who don't know me, I'm Ella Mendonça. I know some of you all are new to SPARCC, but hopefully by this point in the series, you're well acquainted with us. I see some of our SPARCC family members as well. So for those of us who are new to the conversation, SPARCC is the Strong, Prosperous, and Resilient Communities Challenge. We are a multi-year initiative investing in and amplifying local efforts in 6 regions to really ensure that investments reduce racial disparities, build a culture of health, and prepare for a changing climate. The initiative's long-term goal is to really change the way cities and regions grow, invest, and build through cross-sector approaches that benefit low-income communities and communities of color. So we work with 6 amazing local partners that you most likely already know, doing the work on the ground in 6 cities, including Transformation Alliance in Atlanta, Mile High Connects in Denver, Elevated Chicago in Chicago, Neighborhood Collaborative for Resilience in Memphis, Bay Area for All in the SF Bay Area, and as you'll see, our ACT LA partners in LA. So our national partners are Natural Resources Defense Council, Low Income Investment Fund, and Enterprise Community Partners. And so just really briefly, the SPARCC Community of Practice is hosting this event. It really brings together our local and national partners in shared learning and really seeks to uplift local models to the national level to have some of these conversations. And so this particular session, our SPARCC LA core session, is the 3rd in our community ownership series. It's really designed to showcase how SPARCC cities and communities are engaging with community ownership. And I know we have a lot of people who are especially interested in how community ownership can support local small businesses and really anchor and preserve community and culture. And so with that, I'll go ahead and kick it off to Marco. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ella. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Marco Covarrubias. I'm the Operations and Development Associate at Inclusive Action, and I'm joined by my colleague.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tom DeSimone. I'm the CEO at Genesis LA. We're a CDFI serving Los Angeles County.
So today we're going to talk to you about our project that we're about, I would say, like 3 years in, kind of informally, right, Tom?
Sounds about right.
Yeah, and it's called Community Owned Real Estate. We're going to start off here with, excuse me, there we go, with some goals for the presentation. Of course, we want to give a comprehensive overview of the core project. This includes these 5 points here, initially talking about the concept. Then Tom's going to talk about financing the project and what that entailed. I'll speak on the governance and management of the project. Then we're going to end off with some notes about the project's future and what we see moving forward and some lessons learned from the project. So to begin, I wanted to talk about the challenge facing Boyle Heights, a neighborhood in Los Angeles, a historically low-income neighborhood with a deep history of diversity, of activism, of working class organizations, and all sorts of, it's just like a milieu of a lot of different things in Boyle Heights. So it's a very important neighborhood in Los Angeles for the Latino community, for activism in general. And in the last, I would say maybe 10 years or so, there's been a real fear over gentrification in the neighborhood, driven by this real estate speculation and its role in accelerating gentrification in the neighborhood. In about 2016, 2017, there was a lot of activism against gentrification in Boyle Heights, led by a few local groups. This coffee shop here that's pictured with the protesters in front is called Weird Wave Coffee, and it's been kind of a recurring flashpoint for the gentrification debate in Boyle Heights. On one hand, there's anti-gentrification activists who talk about how this is an outside investor coming in and taking a role and taking a part in the rising costs of the neighborhood, both on the commercial side and on the housing side. And then on the other side, the owner of, I think one of the owners of the coffee shop is born and raised in Boyle Heights. And so it kind of makes it this very complex issue. Along with this coffee shop here, there's also a neighborhood in Boyle, or a part of Boyle Heights that has had a high concentration of art galleries. And so that served as another flashpoint of activism for the neighborhood. And so our organizations, Inclusive Action, ELAC, and Little Tokyo Service Center, as I'll introduce in a little bit later, we listened to this public debate that was going on, and we thought that the activists brought up an important point about the encroachment of outside investors in the community. And so at that point, it was kind of like the core project was not very formed at that point, right? And so we began to think about, well, what can we do in our neighborhood where our organizations are located to kind of prevent this encroachment by outside investors, right? So, oops, let me go next here. So just to give you an idea of how this gentrification kind of behaves, I guess, in terms of outside investors, I pulled up this listing from CoStar LoopNet for a building that's actually right across the street from one of the buildings in our portfolio that we'll discuss a little later. And it's this building here, the pawn shop and the restaurant to the right of it. And I highlighted some words here from the listing on the right. So the building is located in Boyle Heights, right? Located within this retail district, commercial corridor. And it's spoken about as like the area is poised for tremendous growth, right? One of the things about Boyle Heights is it's directly adjacent to downtown LA, and the booming like arts district area is just across the bridge from, or across the river from Boyle Heights. And so it's becoming a very desirable place for, you know, the urban professional, as it were, right? And so this is how they speak about this particular building in Boyle Heights. The area is poised for tremendous growth. And they talk about how the area is seeing an increase in demographics through gentrification. I'm not sure what that means, but that's how they spoke about it here. What I found interesting here in the bottom picture here or screenshot is that they highlight the restaurant's lease being month to month and the pawn shop's lease expiring soon, and how that is a selling point for a potential investor to come in and repositioning the asset here, as it's called here, to capitalize on the potential upside in rents, right? And so they talk about it as an opportunity to increase the income at the property. And so this is just an example of how, you know, brokers, investors, and people who are interested in buying property who may not be from the neighborhood talk about these buildings in Boyle Heights. So this kind of stuff got us thinking about, well, what can we do to bring more of a community ownership model to the commercial space in Boyle Heights. And so let me go here. And so we wanted to focus on these commercial properties. The reason being is because from our point of view, the small businesses are among the first to be displaced in changing neighborhoods. And, you know, it's kind of like the typical, you know, you drive down Cesar Chavez Boulevard or Avenue in Boyle Heights, and you see, especially now during the pandemic, a lot of businesses shuttered up, and then the buildings are either being bought and renovated, or they're leased out to new businesses, right? And so that was one piece of it. Another thing is that we saw that a number of initiatives were targeting rent control, affordable housing development, and tenant protections as their means of anti-gentrification work. And so we felt that while there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in that area, that we wanted to take the approach of the targeting like commercial properties, right? And reason being because there's limited attention, at least in LA, to commercial properties, and there's very limited rent control for commercial properties in LA. Another point here is that, excuse me, is that community development in LA has historically been kind of correlated with housing. And even with our partners, ELAC and Little Tokyo, they have very strong housing development backgrounds, right? And so this is probably not the case in many other cities as they incorporate more commercial properties into the work. But this is still kind of like a burgeoning field in Los Angeles. So we wanted to become part of this and offer some sort of solution. And our solution here is the core project. So the project's goal is to take commercial properties off of the speculative real estate market and preserve the small businesses and community serving organizations that reside within those properties. And the way that we're going to preserve them is by providing stable and affordable spaces, right? And the opportunity to become owners of the project portfolio as a whole, or individual buildings, depending on how we set it up later on. So this project is a joint project by East LA Community Corporation. This is a big player, I guess, in East LA's nonprofit world and the development world. They've been a CDC for over 30 years. They have a number of different programs. So they do housing development, and they also have like an organizing wing, and they also have like a community wealth wing. So it's a very broad-based approach that they take. My organization is Inclusive Action for the City. We're a recently minted CDFI, and we have over a decade of serving small businesses and micro entrepreneurs. We focus more on doing micro lending, microfinance, and policy advocacy work, particularly targeting like street vendors and trying to help them out. So the last organization here is Little Tokyo Service Center, another CDC in LA that also has a ton of experience in this realm and in housing development, and they also have a lot of experience in commercial development. So these three organizations came together, and we wanted to kind of leverage the different expertise that each had, and so we built that into the core project as a and we'll get into a little bit later, but defining like the roles that each organization would play in strengthening the project and things like that. So let me move over here. Real quick, before we get into some of the other things, we wanted to define like our vision of what community owned means. And for this project, community owned, we define it as like the community organization serving as a steward for community assets. So this is the approach that we're taking. The short-term goal for this approach is to acquire and rehab the commercial properties. And over the long term, we want to help bring tenants into the ownership group and serve as a bridge to ownership for the community-based businesses and for nonprofits. So just to clarify how we're approaching things here. Just a little bit more about the ownership team and the partner roles. Obviously here the organizations that we have on the left. ELAC is a 55% owner of the project, and they serve as a project lead and property manager for 3 of the sites. Inclusive Action is a 35% owner, and we have a mixed role of providing the business coaching services to the tenants in the core portfolio, and also providing property management for 2 of the other sites in the portfolio. And then lastly, we have Little Tokyo Service Center, who has 15% of ownership in the project, and they oversee the compliance. There's a lot of finance compliance that Tom will get into, and they kind of oversee that and provide some guidance. And of course, we have our financing partner, Genesis LA, which Tom and his team have been a tremendous asset to the project, not just as a financer, kind of like deal sourcing, but also as providing like project management, giving us some guidance on how to move forward, and really being a trusted partner. So shout out to Tom for that. Let me go here. Real quick is the project today. This is the building on the right in the green here is, I'm partial to this building because this is where Inclusive Action's office is going to be in the coming weeks, I think. And so this is a building at 2900 Chavez. You can see a map here from a previous flyer of the buildings. 2 of them are on Cesar Chavez Avenue, a very important commercial corridor in Boyle Heights. Just to the left here off screen is downtown LA. And then we have one site up here in El Sereno, another predominantly Latino kind of like suburb of LA, and then 2 buildings in unincorporated East Los Angeles on Whittier Boulevard, another historic corridor. But yeah, today the project, we've acquired the 5 commercial properties. It was a $10 million transaction, and this was completed sometime in September of 2019, the actual transaction itself. And since then, we've been having the dual role of focusing on rehab and construction of the sites, and then also maintaining tenant improvements for our existing tenants and leasing for new tenants that want to come in. So 12 of the 19 spaces are already occupied, and majority of these are pre-existing tenants. And then construction has already completed at 3 of the 5 properties. This one here.
All right, thank you, Marco. So, the idea for this, as Marco described, was a response to some of the environmental factors happening in the community and the city at large. And Genesis LA began having some initial conversations with our partners at Inclusive Action to start to talk about how could finance be a tool to help address some of these issues around community ownership and help locally based organizations get greater control of those real estate assets. We at Genesis have always really operated on this model of being a finance partner that's at the table with our community development partners. So we very much embed ourselves in development teams early on when we're trying to do something, fairly unique. And we help incubate the project with them from the very start. So what was one of the catalysts for this was an award. We got our New Markets Tax Credit Award in 2016, right after the last presidential election. And we said, we're going to reserve 10 million of our allocation for this, which is, somewhat rare. If you know New Markets, there's sort of a rush to get it out on the street fast, both as a policy priority from the CDFI fund, but also to be competitive for future rounds of New Markets allocation. So we did, take a little bit of a risk, but we said this was something we really wanted to try to pioneer. And the New Markets tax credits could be a really valuable tool to seeding some of the initial funding for that. We also started having some initial conversations with potential philanthropic partners, knowing that we would need some grants as well as PRI dollars to help blend the right cost of capital into the overall structure. So the next thing we started to do was to start modeling, just like any developer would. You have to start thinking about your budget. You'll start thinking about your operating pro forma. How much money can you raise? How much money can you sustain from a payments perspective, debt service payments? So we started building a budget. We started scouring the market by using the CoStar listing service, which gives you sales comparables as well as listings on the market currently. So we started looking at sales prices and, developed an acquisition price per square foot assumption on what we would probably be facing as we went into the marketplace. We also started to tour listed properties to understand what their rehab needs were. So we spent over a year before acquisition got underway, just really studying what was out there, going and touring properties we knew well, unless they were going to sit there for a long time, they probably wouldn't be available by the time we were ready. But it helped us get a sense of what's out there, what condition are they in, what kind of tenants are in there, what are their lease terms, and so we started to study the marketplace. And we did this with our partners, initially Inclusive Action, and then ELAC started to get involved, and then Little Tokyo got involved. So it was an evolution of building the team and building the knowledge base. We also had to include, of course, some holding costs and transaction costs. As folks know, every project has not just the purchase, the real estate itself, and the hard and soft costs that go into the construction, but also fees and escrow and title and all of that. So we had to put that together. And so we walked away with an estimated cost per square foot total development, and we could back into, if we have $10 million of financing through the New Markets tax credits, how much space could that support, and what is our challenge to go find these properties to add up to fully utilize the New Markets tax credit allocation. So in parallel with starting to develop a budget, we had to figure out what would the operations look like once we acquired these. So we started to look at what rents were in the marketplace. So we consulted CoStar as well, also talking with real estate brokers to get a good sense of what rental rates would be per square foot. We were able to reference some other commercial properties as precedents to understand what the operating expenses would be. So we had done some work with ELAC previously, and on a commercial property acquisition, we had some other properties that we had lent to in our portfolio that we could reference, and some of the partners also had other commercial real estate that they owned that we could use. So we faced a little bit of an economics puzzle in that, what are rent comps in a neighborhood like this? There's really, one of the things that Rudy from Inclusive Action had said early on was there's very little quality space in Boyle Heights for emerging businesses to have the resources they need to sustain themselves, to grow. for even nonprofits to have like a quality place to open up their office. I think Inclusive Action's first office was in a place with no air conditioning right next to the freeway. And it was like, here's the keys. And, you know, they had to do all the deferred maintenance work on it themselves. So that's very much the kind of commercial real estate environment in a lot of these communities. And so when you're trying to come up with what comps are, it can be pretty challenging because there's nothing quite like it. The goal of CORE was to provide, for the most part, fully renovated spaces. Anything that was vacant upon acquisition was pretty much rebuilt from scratch. You know, if there was something good there, we didn't demolish it, but spaces were demised into suites. New HVAC was put in, electrical lighting and power and all of that, plumbing, new bathrooms installed, all that sort of stuff. So the idea was to provide that fully renovated space, provide for formal leases. A lot of tenants in Boyle Heights and some other communities don't actually have like handshake leases, or documented, or they're very informal, short-term, month-to-month. And to also provide standard escalation. So like any property owner, you have to raise the rent a little bit, but we wanted to provide a level of stability for these tenants so that even as the neighborhood may change, there isn't a spike in rents suddenly just because the market can bear it. So the rents in the portfolio are about $1.60 to $1.75 per square foot. In California, for all the folks who aren't here, we do by month. I think everywhere else does by year. So these are monthly rents. And that's for the retail tenants generally. And the office space, which did have probably more extensive renovations across the board to recoup some of those costs, those rents were about $1.75 to $2. And just as a point of comparison, rents for pretty crummy space, I would say, are going for about $1.50 to $1.75. That's sort of what you would get for like a little retail space that's just take it as it is and you're responsible for everything. So while these rents are, you know, slightly above for what you're getting, it is generally, we felt, balancing that affordability and stability proposition. So as we started to put the capital stack together to finance this, we knew what the budget was going to be, right? Because we figured out what we could get for the $10 million of allocation that we had to leverage. We could figure out what the acquisition redevelopment costs would be. We began to back into what rents and expenses would be on the estimated 26,000 square feet of real estate we thought we could acquire with the $10 million. And with the operating pro forma that we started to put together, we could figure out how much income is left after expenses to pay for financing. Then we had to figure out, okay, if that's what we have, what blend of financing do we need to be able to sustain the financing with that net operating income each month, each year. So we started to partner up with other financing partners. SPARCC was an early investor in the project, providing a grant to help capitalize the work. The California Endowment and Weingart were two lead local foundations that provided significant grant and PRI capital. And there were a handful of other smaller funders that, you know, gave about 100,000 or less in grants. In total, we raised about $1.2 million in grants. ELAC was able to bring $200,000 in borrower equity. And we also raised $2.75 million in PRIs from both the California Foundation, which Genesis LA brought on balance sheet and then sort of sub-allocated or sub-invested those. We also provided $2.9 million in CDFI loans as part of the leverage financing from our own work. And then our New Markets allocation provided about $3 million in New Markets tax credit equity when purchased by the investors. So that's how we got to the $10 million of capital for the project. So before the New Markets tax credits can close, for those who are not familiar with New Markets, you have to have your site identified and in escrow or already acquired, because New Markets tax credits are invested in low-income census tracts. And the challenge with this particular project is that we were going for a scattered site approach because we weren't looking to buy just one project, but to start to penetrate these neighborhoods with multiple, you know, kind of flags posted in the ground, and hopefully down the road even expand on this, obviously, and have more and more and more of a toehold in these neighborhoods. So we had to assemble properties over a period of time, and at the same time we have the clock running against us, because every time we're buying property, we're having to sit on it while we wait to get enough assembled to close the new markets tax credit financing. So what Genesis LA did was we went to our board of directors with all of those assumptions we just described, and basically asked for permission within a credit box that if we found properties that fit our assumptions, which would bear feasibility to the overall model, that we could move very quickly at the staff level to just close loans on the various sites as we started to assemble them. So we put together an acquisition credit facility. Genesis LA and the California Endowment extended low-cost 12-month acquisition bridge loans, and we thought that this was one of our goals, and I think a success, and at least fairly unique in our experience, bringing in foundations at a sizable capital investment early on, including with debt, PRI loans, was fairly unique. There was a lot still to pan out here. It wasn't as though everything was ready and we were moving into a closing process. We were still, there was still a good amount of uncertainty, even though we had tried to hedge it as best we could. And so credit to philanthropy, both SPARCC and the California Endowment, for willingly investing early, which I think is a trend I hope to see more of, because I think philanthropy is equity in transactions. I always joke that community development is extremely dysfunctional, because in the for-profit environment, equity is the first dollars in, it's often the only dollars in, and then you go get debt. And many times in community development, it's the opposite, which means we're slower, we're more expensive, we have less flexibility, and we have a disadvantage. So we were really trying to change that dynamic with this acquisition phase. We provided loans to help do that. We provided loans up to 95% loan to value. And the SPARCC grant, which ELAC received on behalf of the partners, helped to fill that last 5% for most of these acquisitions. So we basically could finance this entirely. We specifically provided 3% fixed rate interest, which is extremely low, particularly for CDFIs, given our cost of funds. But we did it because it was for a pretty short term period and was leading to a future financing that we were providing comprehensively. We acquired 5 buildings, and ultimately it was about 29,000 square feet of space. One of the things we experienced was that the properties were slightly less per square foot on acquisition and became a little bit more expensive on the rehab side. And at acquisition, about 35% of the space was occupied and 65% was vacant, and that's from a rental revenue projection.
Can I just add here, for these 2 phases here, assembling the capital and the acquisition phase, what Tom highlighted here about philanthropy investing early, that being a key point. The other piece to it is that it was a very collaborative effort between both the partners and the philanthropic funders. And with Genesis, we would do pitch decks together. We would get feedback from the funders about how to tweak the proposal, or how to tweak the program to meet community needs, and to get buy-in from the funders. So we just wanted to highlight that really hyper collaborative process that was at work here. And yeah, our teams worked really closely together, and Tom and Rudy at that point were really.
Okay. Just wanted to know that we already signed up for a $10,000 sponsorship, just so you know.
Oh, cool.
And Connerton gave $5,000 last year, and the BMO was really $20,000.
If folks can just mute, if you're not intending to speak, we can definitely hear you. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Tom. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. That was all important and great points. So here, if you're not familiar with new markets, don't be too intimidated by this. It's just a visual of a lot of what we just talked about. But for all the geeky finance people like myself, you might like this. See how on the left side, various sources, the grants, the PRIs, our loan was assembled into a special purpose leverage lender, which was an affiliate of the ultimate project owner. In this case, Inclusive Action and ELAC. So they aggregated all that capital so that one leverage loan could go into the new markets tax credit transaction. And then JP Morgan Chase acquired our new markets allocation, or invested in it, I should say. And that generated about $3 million in new markets tax credit equity. So when you do a new markets transaction, you have to fully leverage whatever the allocation amount is. So 10 million of allocation, you have to invest $10 million, 7 in this case of a blend of capital, and 3 from the equity. And that goes into a fund, a subsidiary, which we control and we manage, and it makes loans to the project, usually a note A, which mirrors the leverage money, and a note B, which mirrors the new markets tax credit equity. And at the end of the 7-year new markets compliance period, that $3 million note is more or less forgiven. It's a little bit complicated how it all works, but baseline is basically it's forgiven, and so it becomes equity to the project, even though it's structured as debt during the 7 years. And so it's a great form of subsidy. It's a shallow subsidy compared to what folks on the affordable housing side are used to, but it's a really key catalyst to getting going, which is why the allocation was a key tool for us to even get this off the ground. And real quick, just the terms, the new markets compliance period, 7 years, the blended rate of capital that we brought into the structure, and I should say the blended rate of debt. So there were grants, as you saw, but our loan and the PRIs blended together was about 4.3% blended. Because we had that leverage loan outside of the structure, we funded it. We were able to pay both principal and interest, or we will be down the road, to start to pay back some of the loan within the 7-year compliance period. And we specifically structured this, the maturity, even though most leverage loans will mature at the 7-year mark for new markets compliance periods, we wanted to have a up to 10 years so that we could give breathing room to the exit strategy. We weren't quite sure where interest rates would be. Nobody is 7 years down the road. We weren't quite sure what the exit strategy might be in terms of alternative ownership models and bringing in the businesses. We weren't quite sure, who would be comfortable financing this type of an asset. So we said we would give 3 one-year extensions on that maturity to work with the team to figure out what was the best refinance strategy, rather than kind of have an artificial deadline that might not result in the best outcome for everybody. So I think that was a really important thing that we worked with philanthropy on, so that we could get their dollars to be 10-year money as well as ours. And I think it'll be to the benefit of the whole group in the end.
Real quick on governance and management, just to give you a quick idea about how we operate the program. So there's 2 kind of LLCs that are at work here. The core LLC, which serves as the ownership entity. All 3 partners of the project, ELAC, Inclusive Action, and Little Tokyo, are members of this. And in the future, this is the entity where tenants will be able to become members so that they can become part of the ownership group. Along with that main ownership entity, there's a core manager, which serves as the operating entity for the project. We oversee like the project operations, and we've limited the memberships of this LLC here to the original partner so that we can have kind of, focusing on the stewardship of the project. So that's what the core manager LLC here. Each member has a vote in these entities, though in practice we have like recurring meetings and we build consensus, so the voting hasn't really taken effect really in this case. Just some other details here. A division of roles. The property management largely falls on ELAC and Inclusive Action. Mentioned earlier, ELAC has 3 properties that they oversee, and Inclusive Action has 2. Of course, with the project and in practice, like the partners work closely together across the portfolio, so there's a lot of overlap that happens there anyway. On the accounting side, ELAC handles that largely because they were owners of the properties initially, and so they hold a lot of those accounting pieces. And then for construction management, ELAC and Genesis have really taken the lead here on overseeing the rehab of the project. When we were dividing up these roles, and organizations who may want to do this in the future are questions that you can think about are how do you maximize the expertise that the partners are bringing into the project. So ELAC obviously ELAC and Little Tokyo were the developer experts, and Inclusive Action brought in this business coaching aspect that we hope to incorporate into the project to support the tenants. So we really built that into like the operating agreements, into different like division of roles and just how the project operates. We also talked about which systems we should put in place to ensure the sustainability of the project, which is why the manager LLC and the ownership entity are built that way. And then the last piece is how does the project like this fit into the organization's existing commitments, right? A lot of us have multiple projects that we're working on, and we had to ensure that the human capital was like aligning well with what the project's needs were, right? Another thing we want to touch on is COVID-19's impact on the project. A lot of existing tenants couldn't pay rent at the beginning of the pandemic and throughout. And so this has presented both a challenge and kind of like an opportunity to help the tenants. And so some of the things that we've done are offer lease deferrals to many of the tenants who have talked to us about how they can't pay rent. And we've also tried other lease solutions. One of the things that Inclusive Action has worked on the last couple of months is is kind of leveraging our CDFI status to apply for grants to subsidize rents for the existing tenants. Fingers crossed that we'll get like some of these grant monies coming in so that we can continue to support the tenants, because the whole goal of the project is to preserve the small businesses, and so COVID has had a big impact on that. It's also resulted in a lot of leasing and construction delays. But you know, despite those challenges, we've made some pretty good progress. The last thing here is that I want to mention here is the positive outcome for the potential tenants moving forward is that there's been a lot of like flexibility on leases now, because the project is we're trying to understand that tenants need a little more flexibility with shorter leases or better terms. And we're also trying to get income into the project as well. And so we want to make sure that we kind of have like a win-win on both sides, given all the impact that COVID has had. And just to touch on the future of the project, just to be clear, we don't have an ownership transition model chosen just yet. That's why that 3-year cushion that Tom mentioned earlier is going to be really important. And throughout this time, we're kind of like thinking about different ways that we can incorporate the tenants into the ownership. One potential model is that we've discussed is selling shares to tenants or community members, so that we can build equity and expand the program, kind of bringing in like one more building at a time and growing the portfolio that way. I think we're running close to time here, so I'm gonna go towards finishing this off here. Tom, you want to do this lessons learned?
Oh, sure. I mean, real quick takeaways, and we can talk about this in the Q&A too, if you'd like, is, you know, working really early on with funders and as a team. Build contingency in your budget, even though you think you have a lot, it's never enough. Reserves are super important. Luckily, we had some, we would have liked even more, but there's vacancies, there's delays, there's the completely unknown like COVID, and then just building in flexibility like we've done on the exit side.
Mm-hmm. And on the governance and management, I mentioned like making sure that we have the human resources to dedicate staff to the project is really important. And ideally, we would fundraise specifically for positions to help the project reach stabilization. And then, of course, being thoughtful about how the project fits into the existing workflows, and also making sure that that clear division of roles among the partners is like solidified. That's really important. And then the last thing here is making sure that the mission is always centered. So we've had like a lot of debates about how the future ownership should look like, what the benefits of having philanthropic dollars and making the community organizations the stewards, as opposed to handing it over to tenants like fully. So just keeping that mission central is really important there too. we had these closing thoughts here, but I think a lot of this stuff is things that a lot of people here are aligned with anyway. So we'll just go ahead to question Q&A time. So thank you all.
Marco, if you want to leave up that slide, maybe folks can also read it, and that might help bring them into the questions. But a huge thank you to Tom and Marco for, I know we started a couple minutes late, so they were really managing that time pretty well. But we see so many great questions in the chat that we're just going to dive in, so we have enough time for them all. Actually, Chris Cable, did you want to go ahead and I can read your questions in the chat, or you could just share them out? I thought they were both pretty great.
Okay, sure. Wasn't planning on being on video, so forgive the unkempt appearance. First off, thanks for this presentation. It's super interesting. I love how you've structured this approach. I guess with regards to the avenue for tenants to start assuming some degree of ownership into the core LLC, just had a question about like how you saw that happening. And like, for example, would there be minimum investment amounts? Would it be over a certain period of time? Would they gradually assume sort of ownership stakes that would decrease the ownership of the original founding partners, so that there'd be sort of a transition? Just questions along that route, because I heard that, you know, sort of wealth building is among folks who have historically been locked out of those opportunities as one of your goals. So be really interested in how you see that playing out. Thanks.
Do you want to answer, Marco? Or?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have, like I mentioned, we have a few like ideas about how the transition would work. One of them is that the tenants will be able to buy shares into the core LLC, like the ownership entity. And yeah, I think in theory that would diminish the percentage stake that the project partners have in the ownership entity. But one of the things we've discussed is wanting to maintain like a 51% ownership for the partners, so that we can prevent like mission creep. And Tom, do you want to expand on that a little bit? I know you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, one of the things, and none of this is, it's been kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall at this point, and we have a lot of time to figure it all out. But one of the things that we have sort of propositioned is the idea that could the small businesses buy affordably, but buy shares in the project, which creates equity for the existing owners to go buy the 6th property. And if you do this every, you know, certain period of time, you can create some level of scalability and self-sustainability to the project. Because, you know, I think relying solely on philanthropy to just be your down payment every single time until the end of time is not a viable, sustainable model. That opportunity.
Yeah, another thing that I just want to mention is I met with a community organization about a week and a half ago, doing a site visit at one of the buildings for potential, for them to become a tenant. And one of the things that the person I met with came away with is, well, we can really like, what if we buy the building from you guys? Like, so that's another thing that we're kind of like thinking about slowly is what if we do it on a per building basis? And they
but I can't hear them anymore.
And they can,
so that means I'm missing the piece.
Heather, if folks could just mute so we can make sure we're hearing all the responses. I think someone's definitely off mute.
Thank you. Yes, so the like on per building basis, it would be on the organization or whoever wants to buy it to raise that equity to purchase the property. But yeah, it's just another idea we're toying with there.
Rachel, did you want to jump in? I know you had a great question.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually have 2 questions, if that's okay, but I'll start with one. Thank you so much. It's a great presentation, and I've been following this project for years. I'm always really loved the way that it's structured and the innovation of it. You know, because we hear about community ownership really mostly in the housing context, and I love the way that you've tried to apply that to commercial as well. I had a question about how the mission is built into the structure. You talked about how important that is going forward, but these are 7 to 10 year and plus projects. Are there restrictions and guidelines on the types of tenants, on the types of businesses that can join, especially as the ownership composition may change over time with other partners buying in? How are you ensuring that the mission remains central?
Yeah, that's a great question. On the leasing side, we've made it a priority to have like businesses that are already in the community, right? Or people who are in the community who want to start new businesses, to prioritize them in the leasing efforts. One example is a lease that was signed just a few days ago with a plant business called Latinx with Plants, and they already have a business down the street from one of the properties, but they're expanding because plant business is booming, and so they're moving into one of the properties. And anyway, just to highlight there, like we're prioritizing the leasing efforts on community-based businesses that are already there, or people who are starting new businesses from that community, Boyle Heights or unincorporated LA or El Sereno. And then on the other hand, it's community serving organizations. So we had some talks with some other organizations that were not necessarily from Boyle Heights, but they were organizations that would serve community members. Yeah, so that's like just one way there. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And apologies, I had my camera off. That was rude. So now I have it back on. I have a second question. Alice said it was okay for me to ask as well. After the 7 to 10 years, if there's NOI coming in that's freed up because you're not paying debt service any longer, what is the concept that is the partnership percentage meant to also represent percentage ownership of any future earnings? And would that be divided up among the partners, among the new partners? Would it be reinvested in the project? Would it reduce rents? I'm being optimistic here and saying that someday this will make you some money. And so what are you planning to do with that? Or will you just reduce rents and reinvest or buy new properties, or what's the plan?
Yeah, I think this is another thing that's not really set in stone yet, but I think our vision is that we would provide like some kind of dividend to the owners of the project. But I really like the idea of also like lowering the rents. I guess it would also be depending on who comes into the ownership, like what they decide. Another piece that we haven't fully formed yet is what, like if you have, let's say 10 tenant owners, like what kind of decision-making body that would look like, and what, how that would work out. So I think we're open to like each of those ideas you mentioned, like the dividend, the reducing the rents, or even adding additional properties. I would say it's like all of the above, like in an ideal world, right? But yeah, I think that would be, yeah, something that the tenant owners we would want them to decide how to distribute their earnings, right? Tom, you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I mean, if the assumption is that the new owners are also tenant businesses, the dividend can be seen as both a return on investment or a net reduction in their operating facility costs in some ways, because they're getting a portion of their rent back. I think we've been really interested in trying to find ways that the project could sustain itself and grow organically. So by selling shares and getting equity, by redistributing operating income cash flows into future acquisitions. I think a lot of it will play out depending on the actual economic performance, but we're really intrigued by some of those sort of financial sustainability pathways to expanding the portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
I think Monica I see a hand raised.
Yeah, go ahead, please, Monica, sorry.
There.
Hi, this is a great presentation, and I think your flexibility just shows the trust you guys have developed in the partnership, which is so important. I guess my question is, like, this is a pure business model, and has building preservation components. Sorry, I'm on a bike. I always try to do two things at once. And that's kind of my question.
I love it.
Is,
Multitask.
did you guys explore the ability of combining this model with affordable housing? Because obviously if you purchase these buildings, these are sort of precluded to be redeveloped, and we have such huge housing needs, but maybe, it's too complex and you shouldn't ride a bike while you watch a webinar kind of thing.
We'd actually, some of the properties that we looked at originally were mixed use. Ultimately, the ones that worked out in the short time frame we had were 100% commercial. So we're definitely open to that mixed use. The new markets does add some levels of complication. New markets doesn't allow for solely residential rental in any one building, but I think sort of what we've done here as a model is transferable to residential, and we're talking with other partners about doing very similar things from a housing perspective.
Yeah. And two of the partners in the project, ELEC and Little Tokyo, they have a lot of experience in operating those mixed use like buildings. There's a few in Bohai and a few in Little Tokyo as well, so I'm sure they'd be open to it.
So I see a call that we will be definitely sharing resources after this, and we'll be sharing some. I think there's also some great links that other folks have shared in the chat. We'll also reach back out with. I think that's it on questions. I know we just have a couple more minutes left, so Tom, Marco, unless there's anything you want to add, I can kick it over to Devin.
All right, I guess I'll close us out here. So I just want to thank everybody for joining. This is the last of the 3 of these consecutive weeks, really focus on community ownership, including sort of that first one that some folks may have seen, that was sort of the overall framework. Some time we spent last week on incubating partnerships, and then this obviously focused a little bit more on commercial. So for the rest of the fall, the SPARCC work on community ownership is really sort of moving over to this online platform called Crew that we're really trying to push a lot of this conversation to, so folks can get engaged with each other and not just hear from the Zoom heads on the screen. So there's going to be a lot of one-on-one content that we put on there. All of these webinars and the slides will be there, including the webinar we did this spring from the Community Investment Trust. And so for folks who join this webinar, there might be some interest in looking back to that one as well. And then more on central server models and partnerships to get folks started and build capacity going forward. I want to thank the presenters one more time. I think that there's some great points that came out of this that really benefit a lot of the projects. And I was particularly struck by the sort of the brave, bold step into taking direct ownership of property, which I think is often, it's hard, it's risky, it's complicated, but it's often the thing that really is the game changer for seeing some of the results you want to in community. And to getting the funder support to get dollars in folks' hands early, so you can act in the ways that the private market is able to, and often circumvent a lot of our best efforts. And lastly, that point you made, Tom, both in the prep call and here about really testing that hypothesis and putting pen to paper on numbers, and thinking about how to get some of the things done that have been dreams to date. So thanks again for doing this. We really appreciate it. It's going to be archived for anyone anyone folks want to share it with, and we have all of your emails, so you'll all be getting invites to Crew. So thanks all, and enjoy the rest of your day.